Imalda Drex was known as the quiet widow at the edge of Pine Grove, reclusive, soft-spoken, and always seen alone. Sevra Drex, her daughter, vanished from public view at 13. Linric Drex, her youngest, was rumored to be homeschooled but never once spotted in town. For years, no one questioned their absence. But when children across the town began to disappear without a trace, the truth behind the Drex family unraveled into something no one in Pine Grove was prepared to face. A nightmare stitched together by a mother with a mind full of rituals, control, and cruelty. What police uncovered inside her home would haunt them forever. A place not of refuge, but of ritual. A house of horrors built by a mother no one truly knew. The town of Pine Grove had always been a quiet and peaceful place. Tucked between thick woods and rolling hills, it was the kind of town where everyone knew each other, and children rode their bikes down the street without fear. But everything changed one summer when 10-year-old Mavis Elrod vanished on her way home from piano class. Her backpack was found near a wooded path, torn open, and her music sheets scattered like leaves. Search parties combed the area for days, but Mavis had disappeared without a trace. Her parents were devastated, and the town held candlelight vigils, praying for her safe return. No one could have imagined that Mavis would be only the first. 2 months later, a second child went missing. This time it was 9-year-old Thomas Rayner. He had been playing in his front yard when his mother went inside to answer the phone. When she returned, he was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints, and no clues. Panic began to settle in Pine Grove. Parents clutched their children's hands tighter, and schools began escorting students home in groups. People started locking their doors during the day, something they never used to do. Some believed there was a predator lurking in the woods, while others thought it might be someone from town. The police received dozens of tips, but none led anywhere. Then, in early winter, 12-year-old Kalen Bixby disappeared on his way to the corner store. A security camera caught a brief glimpse of him walking down Birch Lane, but he never made it to the store. His bike was found leaning against a fence, perfectly upright, as if he had just stepped away for a moment. By now, fear had turned into hysteria. News vans lined the streets, reporters asking if a serial kidnapper was targeting Pine Grove's children. The town's police department, under pressure, increased patrols, set up checkpoints, and even brought in outside investigators. Still, nothing came of it. No bodies, no witnesses, no suspects. Just silence and sorrow. What puzzled detectives most was the lack of any connection between the victims. They were from different schools, neighborhoods, and backgrounds. There was no clear pattern. Whoever was behind the disappearances was careful and methodical. It was as if the children had simply vanished into thin air. Some townspeople grew paranoid and suspicious of one another. A few families moved away, unable to cope with the anxiety and grief. But amidst all the fear, no one ever gave a second thought to Imalda Drex. She had lived in Pine Grove for over a decade, in a large, creaky Victorian house at the edge of the woods. It was a gloomy place with faded curtains and weeds choking the yard. Most people found her strange but harmless, a widow with 2 children no one had seen in years. When asked, she told neighbors that Sevra and Linric were being homeschooled and didn't socialize much. People accepted it. They figured she was just one of those reclusive types who preferred her own company. Imalda rarely went into town, except to pick up groceries once a week. She wore long gray dresses and spoke in a low, distant voice. Her presence was forgettable, like a shadow that moved quietly through the world. If anyone had paid closer attention, they might have noticed her. Cart was always filled with canned goods, bottled water, and medical supplies. They might have wondered why her windows were always covered, or why there were strange symbols etched into the wood above her front door. But no one questioned it. In a town distracted by fear, some things just slipped through the cracks. So, while search parties roamed the forests and police investigated every corner of Pine Grove, the one place they never looked was the very place where the nightmare had taken root. Behind those darkened windows and locked doors, something unspeakable was already in motion, and the person responsible had been right there, hiding in plain sight, all along. The break in the case came not from forensics, witness statements, or detective work, but from a routine delivery gone wrong. On a cold March morning, a local courier arrived at the Drex property with a package requiring a signature. The driver, a young man named Denny Markell, had made deliveries to the outskirts of Pine Grove before, but rarely to this particular address. As he approached the gate, the air shifted, thick, still, and heavy with an unpleasant smell he couldn't quite place. The front yard was overgrown, and the porch sagged under the weight of neglect. He knocked, waited, and knocked again. There was no answer. He was about to leave the package when something caught his eye. A small, pale hand pressed against the attic window, then quickly withdrawn. Denny froze. For a moment, he wasn't sure what he had seen, but the image stayed with him, as did the strange, putrid scent that clung to his clothes long after he left. That afternoon, Denny called the non-emergency police line, reporting what he'd seen and smelled. Normally, a vague tip like this wouldn't trigger immediate action. But with 3 children still missing and the town on edge, authorities couldn't afford to ignore anything. 2 officers were dispatched for a wellness check, more to quiet concerns than in expectation of finding anything serious. When they arrived at the house, they were immediately struck by the same odor Denny had described. It was sickly sweet and unmistakably biological, a smell that police knew too well, the scent of decay. The officers knocked and called out, identifying themselves, but there was no response. The windows were boarded from the inside, and a strange humming sound vibrated through the walls, like old machinery running deep below the floorboards. After several minutes of no answer and no visible movement, the officers requested backup and authorization to enter the home. When permission came through, they forced the door open. The hinges groaned as the door creaked wide, revealing darkness and the overwhelming stench of rot. Inside, the house looked abandoned. The wallpaper, peeled in strips, dust coated every surface. Dead flies clung to the windowsills. The only light came from the officers' flashlights, casting long, trembling shadows across the rooms. They called out again, but were met only by silence and the low hum from beneath the floor. As they moved deeper into the house, they found room after room in disarray. Old toys scattered across the floor, crude, hand-drawn posters of stars, animals, and strange geometric shapes taped to the walls. In one bedroom, they discovered a row of small mattresses, each one bolted to the floor, each one stained. Beside them were buckets, chains, and plastic utensils worn down to nubs. The walls were covered in disturbing imagery, childlike drawings of hollow-eyed figures, dark forests, and burning suns. Some were splattered with what appeared to be dried blood. Others featured strange phrases scribbled repeatedly, like chants or mantras. The officers realized they weren't dealing with neglect or squalor. They were looking at something much more sinister. Upstairs, the attic was padlocked shut. When they broke it open, they found what could only be described as a holding cell. Thick metal bars sealed off a corner of the room, inside which were toys, a torn blanket, and several empty food containers. There was no sign of Imalda. Her children, who had supposedly been homeschooled, were also nowhere to be seen. But the discoveries within the home, the chains, the barred attic, the symbols, told a story loud enough. This wasn't just a case of a recluse or a hoarder. This was the epicenter of something deeply wrong, something that had gone unnoticed for far too long. The house was sealed off as a crime scene. Neighbors stood behind yellow tape, staring at the broken windows and sagging roof, wondering how the nightmare they'd feared could have been growing right next door. The real horror of the Drex house was buried deeper than anyone had imagined. While officers combed the upstairs rooms, forensics teams explored the lower levels. At first glance, the basement appeared standard, damp, cluttered, and filled with discarded furniture. But behind a rusted pantry shelf, they discovered a hollow thud when knocking on the wall. A closer inspection revealed a seam barely visible beneath layers of peeling wallpaper. When investigators peeled it back, they found a narrow steel door with no handle, bolted shut from the outside. Once the bolts were removed, the door creaked open into darkness. A cold, stale draft wafted out, and what lay beyond was unlike anything the team had seen before. A tunnel, crudely dug and reinforced with warped planks, stretched into the earth beneath the house. The floor was uneven, covered in dirt and traces of dried mud. The walls were covered in black paint, streaked with markings resembling ancient runes and cryptic symbols. Lights hung overhead, dim and flickering, strung together with exposed wiring. The tunnel branched off into 3 separate rooms. The first was lined with shelves containing jars of preserved meat, labeled only with numbers and dates. In the corner sat a small bed, rusted and stained, with leather straps attached. The air in the room was cold and still, and the walls were covered with drawings similar to those found upstairs. Grotesque, childlike figures, spirals, and eyes without pupils. Investigators realized this wasn't just a hiding place. It was a prison. In the second room, officers found Linric Drex. He was curled up in a corner, barely conscious, his body frail and bruised. His skin was pale from lack of sunlight, his eyes sunken and distant. He flinched when the light hit him, as if he hadn't seen brightness in years. Beside him was a bucket of stagnant water, a few crusts of bread, and a mattress reduced to bare springs. He had been chained to the wall, the metal cutting into his wrist. Paramedics were called immediately. As they carried him out on a stretcher, he stared upward with a blank expression, murmuring something under his breath that no one could understand. The third room was the most chilling. It was sealed by a reinforced steel door, unlike the others, and required specialized tools to pry open. Inside was what investigators later described as a surveillance control center. Dozens of small monitors lined the walls, each wired to cameras, hidden throughout the house, bedrooms, hallways, even the basement cells. Many of the tapes were labeled with children's names. Some names matched the missing children. Others were unfamiliar, suggesting a wider scope of victims than previously suspected. Several monitors displayed frozen frames, children sitting silently, eyes wide, unmoving. Others showed only static, the tapes either damaged or wiped. In the back of the room, forensic teams found a dusty cabinet filled with boxes. Each box was marked with a name and date. Inside were personal items: a doll, a sneaker, a school ID card, a hair tie. Tokens of the children who had entered this place and never left. Blood tests confirmed human traces on many of the items. It became clear that the house had not only been used to imprison and observe, but to systematically document suffering. The extent of the abuse was methodical, not impulsive or chaotic, but ritualistic, deliberate. As the news broke, Pine Grove was gripped by disbelief. No one had suspected Imalda Drex of such monstrous behavior. Her children had been hidden in plain sight, one dead, one barely alive. And the evidence in that basement suggested more victims, more horrors, and a deeper sickness than anyone had imagined. The hunt for Imalda now became a statewide manhunt. But even as officers searched for her, the community knew the damage had already been done. The house wasn't just a crime scene. It was a graveyard of innocence. The investigation into Imalda Drex's past revealed a web of darkness that stretched far beyond the quiet streets of Pine Grove. As law enforcement dug through records and pieced together fragments of her life, they began to understand that the horrors found in her home were not an isolated act of madness, but the result of years of planning, manipulation, and hidden cruelty. Imalda was born in a small town 2 states away under a different name, Milena Cross. Her childhood had been marred by tragedy. Her parents died in a house fire when she was 9, leaving her to be raised by a distant aunt known for her strict and unusual religious beliefs. Records from the time indicated that Milena, later changing her name to Imalda in her 20s, had spent several years in a psychiatric institution as a teenager, though the exact reasons were sealed under privacy laws. By the time she was 25, she had completed nursing school and taken a job at a juvenile psychiatric hospital. That's where the first red flags appeared. At the institution, Imalda was well liked by some staff, but described as obsessively controlling by others. Reports were made about her overly strict treatment of patients, particularly those under 12. One doctor even filed a complaint suggesting she was performing unauthorized isolation exercises with young patients. Nothing was ever proven, and Imalda left the facility shortly after the complaint surfaced. She moved frequently after that, changing towns every couple of years, never staying long enough to build lasting ties. But with every place she left, there were whispers, rumors of strange behavior, unexplained disappearances, or children who were there one day and gone the next. The man she eventually married, Imalda Drex, was a quiet, soft-spoken mechanic. They settled in Pine Grove and had 2 children, Sevra and Linric. Neighbors remembered Colvin as kind but distant, often looking tired and withdrawn. 5 years into their marriage, Colvin was found dead in the woods behind their home. The cause of death was listed as suicide by overdose, though the details were vague. Authorities at the time accepted the ruling, but with new eyes on the case, investigators reopened his file. Toxicology showed signs of a rare plant-based poison. One that Imalda had purchased online under a false name months before his death. It was likely that Colvin had discovered something about her activities and paid the price for it. Attention then turned to Sevra, Imalda's eldest child. Authorities tracked her down, living under an alias in a women's shelter 2 states away. When she was approached, she initially refused to talk, but after hours of questioning, she broke down and revealed the truth about her mother. Sevra said she had escaped 4 years earlier after enduring years of mental and physical abuse. According to her, Imalda had created a belief system she called the returning, based on the idea that some children were born with broken spirits and needed to suffer in order to be cleansed. These teachings were laced with religious undertones and a distorted sense of morality. Imalda saw herself as a guide, someone who helped children reach their final light. She kept journals filled with these ideas, blending pseudoscience, mysticism, and her own trauma into a doctrine of pain. Sevra described rituals involving long periods of isolation, forced fasting, and exposure to disturbing visuals and sounds. Her mother believed that emotional collapse was a sign of spiritual release. Sevra admitted she had once helped restrain another child, a decision that haunted her daily. She eventually fled in the night, leaving Linric behind. Her guilt had kept her silent until now. Everything she revealed matched what investigators had already found. It confirmed that Imalda was not just disturbed. She was dangerous, deliberate, and deeply convinced of her own righteousness. And she was still out there. The search for Imalda Drex intensified with each passing day. Her name and face flooded news broadcasts across the country. Flyers were posted in every town, and tip lines were overwhelmed with calls, most false, some too vague to follow. The FBI took over the case, forming a task force dedicated solely to locating her. But Imalda seemed to have vanished, as if swallowed by the very shadows she'd lived in for so long. While agents scoured motels, abandoned houses, and transit stations, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A hiker in a remote stretch of forest outside the town of Grello, nearly 300 miles from Pine Grove, stumbled upon what looked like a makeshift shrine built into the hollow of a dead tree. The structure was made of bones, feathers, and children's toys, all arranged around a cracked mirror. Etched into the bark were the same symbols found inside Imalda's house: spirals, eyes, and cryptic words repeated in a looping pattern. Authorities were called immediately. Forensics confirmed traces of Linric's blood on one of the toys. She had been there. Investigators began combing the woods in a grid pattern, following faint trails and signs of movement. After 2 days, they found what they were looking for: a small underground bunker disguised beneath piles of rotting leaves and logs. It had been dug into the side of a hill, reinforced with stones and camouflaged to blend perfectly with the forest floor. Inside, there was just enough space for a mattress, food rations, a lantern, and notebooks, dozens of them. Imalda was not there, but what she left behind was worse than anyone had expected. The notebooks were filled with obsessive writings, charts of stars, sketches of children, lists of names, many previously unknown. In some entries, she claimed to be preparing the chosen for their ascension. In others, she ranted about interference and corrupted vessels. The tone fluctuated between religious zealotry and scientific delusion. There were also letters addressed to Linric and Sevra, filled with twisted affection and promises that the pain would pass and they would rise higher than the others. It became painfully clear that she believed her mission wasn't over. She was preparing to start again. 2 weeks later, a call came from a bus depot security office in the city of Marvine. A woman had been caught on camera using a fake ID to purchase a ticket under the name Marla Knox. Facial recognition software confirmed it was Imalda. She had boarded a bus heading west. The task force intercepted the vehicle just 2 towns away. Officers boarded calmly, moving row by row, but Imalda wasn't there. At the final row, they found her coat, scarf, and ID, all left neatly on the seat, as if she had vanished in midair. The footage at the previous stop revealed the truth. She had exited the bus moments before police arrived, disappearing into a crowd near a train station. It was a painful reminder of how close they had come, and how quickly she could slip away. Investigators suspected she had been tipped off, possibly by someone who sympathized with her twisted beliefs. Her online presence, once buried, had started to gain attention. Forums surfaced, discussing her teachings as if she were a prophet. Disturbingly, a few even claimed she had done important spiritual work. Whether these people were serious or mentally unstable, it became clear Imalda had planted her poison deep. The case remains open, but Imalda Drex is still missing. Linric, though alive, suffers from permanent trauma and remains in protective custody under medical supervision. Sevra, now an adult, lives under a new name and has cut off all ties with the past. The Drex house was demolished by court order, though neighbors say the land still feels cursed, that nothing grows there anymore. And every once in a while, someone claims to see a figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching, waiting,